ضيوفنا الأعزاء أهلا وسهلا بكم. نحن على بعد خطوات من الجلسة القادمة بعنوان الإعلام كقوة محورية في التنمية المجتمعية والاقتصادية. يدير هذه الجلسة الأستاذ داريل فون دينكن الرئيس التنفيذي لمجموعة IRF. المتحدثون تورستن روجاس دانيلسن صحفي سابق وخبير استراتيجي في الاتصال والإعلام، دكتور فاني مادسن باحثة في مجال الدراسات الدولية، والأستاذ ماثيو بيشوب مستشار إعلامي، أيضا أنجيلا تشيتكارا مدير تطوير الأعمال الدولية في شركة بانجاي للترفيه. Welcome to stage.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Saudi Media Forum. We now join you here at the Leaders Theatre for a session titled Media as a Pivotal Force in Social and Economic Development. This session will be moderated by Mr. Darrell von Dinken, with Mr. Matthew Bishop, Ms. Anjela Chitkara, Dr. Fanny Agershoe-Madsen, and Mr. Torsten Rojas Danielsen. Joining us as guest speakers, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Are we ready to go? Yes? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this panel, which is going to be most insightful, I'm sure you'll think and believe. Today we're going to be speaking about media as a pivotal force in social and economic development. We have the illustrious lineup of panelists here. We've got Anjela Chitkara from I'll just read here quickly.
Yeah.
From
U.S.-India Corridor.
Yes, founder and CEO of U.S.-India Corridor, the Columbia University in the States. We have Fanny Agershoe-Madsen, Agrechu. You are a researcher at the University of Roskilde in Copenhagen. And we have Torsten Rojas, who is a researcher and a strategic expert in communications and media, formerly at the public broadcaster in Denmark, DK. I'll just let you to just take another 30 seconds to just introduce you a bit further so we can frame of what your know-how is all about.
Sure.
Let's start with you, Angela.
Thank you, Darrell. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here at the Saudi Media Forum. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. So I have had many careers in my lifetime. I started off as a journalist. It's a career that I wanted since the age of 5. And I had realized those dreams in becoming a journalist in different pockets of the world. And I spent time in India where I helped set up the assignment desk, and I helped connect the India editorial programming and integrate it into global programming. And so from there I transferred, as many journalists end up doing, I ended up going into public relations. And today, public relations is a different beast altogether. Yes, we have technicians, but we go from technicians to strategic counseling. It's much more sophisticated in nature, and as the world, in public relations and local markets defines what it actually is, I think globally, as we were talking before the panel started, social media has taken on a life of its own, and we'll talk more about that. But thank you, and I'm excited to be here.
And Fanny, you are a regular visitor to this part of the world?
More or less.
More or less, yes.
This is my 4th time in Saudi. I'm very, very pleased to be invited here. I love spending time in Saudi Arabia, but this is the first time at the Saudi Media Forum. I'm very excited to come here also to sort of disseminate what I'm researching. I have a background in Middle East studies. I've been living and studying Arabic in Cairo, and political science from University of Copenhagen. I have been working on Saudi Arabia, looking into the politics, the economic developments the past 12 years. And then recently I did a PhD on the politics of fun in Saudi Arabia, I call it.
That's a great title, Politics of Fun.
Yeah, and hopefully we can talk more about that, but it's a pleasure to be here to also give back to the Saudi people.
I have to say, Fanny also has great tips of where to go in Riyadh and anybody who's new in town. Fanny is definitely the person for that as well. And Torsten, just a quick introduction to yourself.
Yes, I'll do it briefly. My background is in journalism. I worked at the Danish equivalent to the BBC. So I was a news reporter, so I come with a newsroom experience. And just like Angela, I switched to what my colleagues called the dark side some years ago. I went into public relations and communications, so now I advise companies operating both in Denmark, but also increasingly here in Saudi Arabia, with whatever endeavor they're in. And I sell my advice to people offering many types of strategic counseling now. So yeah, the last piece of journalism I did was actually an article about being a tourist here in Saudi Arabia for a Northern European audience. And that has also led me to get some tips about what's going on in both Riyadh and in Jeddah.
I'm sure that makes great reading. We're talking about media today as if it's something new, and we're all confronted with new problems, new opportunities, new challenges. But it not really is that new, because media, whether it's today or in the past, has always sat in the intersection of technology, society, and the economy. In any case, it's been shaping how people understand the world since we've had media, since we had the Bush telephone, basically. And we measure it how institutions are trusted as much as how confident economies can feel. Now, at the same time today, we're under real pressure. Pressure's really coming up because more and more people are involved, of course. We've got more and more channels and more feeders and tools. We've got the issue of an incredible speed that AI delivers. Everything's super quick. Certainly quicker than a human being. There's an ever-increasing shrinking attention span because media is so quickly. Where's the impact? Where's the thought behind it? Fast-aging skills. We're losing the skills almost in a generational and a less than generational rhythm. And there's a constant tension. This is the main problem today. There's a constant tension between being first and being right. So, coming to the title of our panel here, media as a driver of social and economic development. Fanny, maybe I'll start with you. From your perspective, how does media function as an engine of social and economic development in societies today?
Well, first of all, I will mainly be talking based on my own research that is about Saudi Arabia and my interest in this rapid transformation that is undergoing in Saudi Arabia, both the economic, of course, we talk about investments, but very much also the social level. So what I have researched is how important media is here to communicate this transition. And here we can both see there is an important task for media to communicate politics to an international audience, but also to the national audience. So in that way, what perhaps is often portrayed as as nation branding is actually also very political. It talks about the transitions that a country like Saudi Arabia is undergoing, but make those political reforms very tangible in a way. So it, especially through images and the visual dimensions, these policies, these reforms are communicated to the outside world and to the national population in Saudi. And in that way, it's also, if we can sort of look at media as different platforms, you have one kind of media that's the news coverage that is communicating politics in one way. Then we have PR campaigns that are also a kind of media that is more like the state image that is communicated, and that is communicating different types of political reforms. And then we also have social media platforms that are reaching a whole different audience, and in that way media works to communicate these transformations and make it visible to the outside world.
So, Angela, if I could ask you, in practical terms, how does credible media influence investment confidence, governance quality, and just generally development outcomes?
So may I just respond?
Absolutely, yes.
If you don't mind. I loved what you just said, Fanny. I just want to continue in that vein. There's also, coming here to Saudi Arabia, this is actually my third trip in the last year and a half. My father used to work here in the 1970s, and he used to tell me stories about Saudi Arabia. And when I had come here a year and a half ago, and he told me stories as if he was like the Indiana Jones in the desert. And when perceptions, of countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia or whether it's India or whether it's the U.S., there's a responsibility for good journalism and good reporting. And social media actually plays a role in that. When I've come back now, I wrote an opinion piece about outdated lens. It's not the same Saudi Arabia. It's we're viewing, even the most senior people, I've been shocked, have been viewing countries through outdated lens where their companies have a geographic footprint. And that to me is surprising because we need the most current information available. There's a change that's happening both on the media side and the PR side. And I think I might address this question, your second one. On the PR side, there are new skills that are needed, from technician to strategic counseling. On the media side, there are media outlets that are reinventing themselves because the old models are no longer, they're no longer strong revenue streams. And like you said, there are different platforms where people, and Fanny had said, there are different ways of people consuming information, so influencers play a significant role. So convenings, if you think about convenings as a platform of convening people and influencing and then developing content and then socializing that content, that's becoming the new model.
What's your take on that then, Torsten?
On the new model?
Yes.
I would say that a lot of new skills are required for people to really be successful in the media business now, both on the one side of the ecosystem, which is like the major publishing houses, but also in strategic communications, as I represent right now. I think, as you said before, Darrell, the skills and the tools are developing so fast that people can't really follow.
Yep.
So there's also this sense of fatigue in organizations at this point, that we're presented with all these new tools, but we don't really know how to use them yet. And this really requires very, very strong leadership.
Yeah.
I think it's critical for leaders to have a conversation about concerns with their employees, about why we are using these tools, because we can do a lot of things with them, but it's not certain that we have to use them. And I see a lot of people when I go into organizations, both media organizations and also companies, I see a lot of frustration with the thought that people have to run a lot faster now because of AI. They look at their neighbor or their colleague and say, how can he produce, or how can he or she produce that much more output in so little time? So there's a real source for frustration here. So my point is that leadership is really required here because these tools are not really they're not really suited for a media landscape that is moving so fast. So I would say, push the brake once in a while and really try to reflect on how AI tools, for instance, can help you in your organization.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned skills, so why don't we just kind of stay with skills? The skills and knowledge decay and staying relevant is even more relevant today than any other time. Fanny, so look, I know you wanted me to ask you this, that's why I can read it out. In countries undergoing rapid political and cultural transitions, you've argued that media and entertainment are increasingly used to signal transformation. So how does this really unfold in practice in the area of skills and knowledge decay?
Well, in practice, it works in many different ways. What I have researched is specific ways that a state like Saudi Arabia can position itself and to understand why the importance of positioning itself, how it works. We also need to understand the temporality of it, how the previous decades, how they were perceived from the outside world. So as most of us know, the international sort of stereotypical assumptions about Saudi Arabia has been very strong to this idea of Saudi Arabia being a very conservative place, a place where women didn't have a lot of rights. And all these assumptions are actually being taken rather than just being silenced. These sort of temporal assumptions are being taken and used as ways to position Saudi Arabia as a leader of the future. We see it when we walk around here. The whole topic and emphasis of the future is very much apparent. And that is a way that in specific campaigns, I've been looking at the World Cup 2034 campaign, for example, football. How is football an excellent way of branding the country to the outside world, making a new sort of national identity? And here we can see the topic of temporality and all these stereotypical assumptions actually being challenged through images. We see in this campaign, we see women playing football that is directly countering these assumptions about Saudi Arabia that used to be very dominant in the international sphere. And it's also very curated images, right? So it's also reaching, even though
what about the skills? What skills are needed there? What we're talking about is proper storytelling, aren't we?
Yeah, it is definitely storytelling, and it's also it's a whole like analysis of what kind of assumptions are we challenging. So it's not only about talking about the new Saudi Arabia, the new identity. It needs to come with an analysis of what assumptions are we challenging, and if I can add to that, that's what I have experienced in my research is that these PR, what we perhaps see as PR campaigns, nation branding, they're not only working, they're not only directed at the international audience, they're actually also politically targeting frustrations among the Saudi youth. So what I have met when I have conducted interviews with a lot of young Saudis, they have been enormously frustrated about these international assumptions about, and that's where skills come into play, about these young Saudis as being lazy and not well educated, left behind and so on. These stereotypes have made them feel misrepresented at the international level, and in that way these sort of images of Saudi Arabia, even through PR campaigns or on social media coming from influencers, are actually targeting these assumptions about lack of skills.
So talking about lack of skills then, Torsten, from your advisory work, what skill gaps do you most often see inside organizations which are under pressure?
I think it very much depends on which organization we're talking about. Because if we remember the old motto from Mark Zuckerberg, move fast and break things, that might work in a Silicon Valley kind of environment or a fintech startup here in Jack's district. But if you are a mature media institution, this logic doesn't apply, you know. So I see within organizations a huge gap between employees, the ones that are the early adapters that will just, you know, plunge into whatever new tool is being presented to them, and the ones that are more skeptical. And of course, I've been working with journalists a lot, and journalists are both by nature very curious, but they are also very skeptical. So in that way, I think that, sorry about the microphone here. I think, again, we have to return to leadership. The leadership has to be very, very clear about why they're using these AI tools and how they can benefit from them.
So
because when I was
thinking, basically.
Well, sorry?
Critical thinking is missing.
Yeah, critical thinking and judgment is both very important with both journalists and at the editorial level and at higher up in at the publishing level. I think there is a fear that organizations might break into two in some way, with the early adopters and the ones being skeptical. But I think you also have to really explain to journalists, for instance, working within the media organizations, how AI tools can enhance their ability to practice their core skill, which is judgment and editorial decisions, you know, much more than just seeing it as a way to produce more. So, for instance, if I take an example, I was out as a journalist interviewing people all day. I met with ministers, CFOs, CEOs, and different stakeholders. And when I got back, you know, I had like a ton of material, 2.5 hours of video footage that I had to reduce to one and a half minute for the news show, to give perspective and, you know, to give context and all these things. And with AI now, I can just plug this 2.5 hours into a machine, and it makes an entire transcript where I can see an overview of who's saying what to who. So I think journalists should realize actually that these tools can benefit them in many ways and help them, you know, with all the repetitive tasks that they are using too much time on, and use more time being acting journalists actually.
Yes, absolutely. You know, critical thinking overall, Angela, you know, what's the societal and economic consequences when AI-driven media erodes credibility?
So I think judgment. I think you know, judgment is very important to exercise. I think we need to understand we need to develop these critical thinking skills and news literacy, so we know the difference. We have the benefit of having been in the news business, right, to understand what a good story is. Trust is something that we haven't mentioned, and trust keeps coming up in all sorts of conversations, right? What you're, you know, referencing in terms of organizations, you know, has to do with governance, risk, and resilience. And as I think about it, I think about multinationals that are global in local markets with, you know, a talent base that's local, where they need to think about cultural fluency, right, and integration. And when you don't have that, there's risk. And in the context of AI, you know, if we think about it from an institutional perspective or an organizational perspective, once you have it on an institutional level, it'll absorb the risks by setting standards and frameworks. Within organizations, they are the ones who, you know, should feel comfortable in adopting AI and trying it out and testing it. So I think the skills, you know, from a PR perspective and understanding exactly where we are in the world today, you know, Saudi Arabia today, the whole world is going through a whole global realignment. You know, we're rethinking relationships. Saudi Arabia, in the last couple of years, has now become a convening place for the world to have conversations about peace, right? And so from my perspective, I think about...
Well, Saudi Arabia is having conversations which no one's expecting.
They're not expecting
such as
it.
peace,
That's right.
you know,
That's right.
such as
yeah.
tourism,
right.
such as equality,
That's right.
such as opportunities,
Right.
such as giving next-gen future,
Right.
involving them.
Youth unemployment, which Fanny had mentioned, that was back in 2010. You know, we saw that in 2010 with the Arab Spring.
You may want to put your...
Yeah, we saw that, you know, with the Arab Spring in 2010, and everyone in local markets, you know, these issues, whether, you know, I was walking through another panel discussion, they were talking about Minneapolis. You know, Minneapolis is something that we're not just talking about on a local level, we're talking about it globally and thinking, you know, what is the U.S.'s role in the world, and what, you know, how is the change on a local level happening? These issues matter more and more. Youth unemployment affects us globally. The inclusion of AI, making sure that everyone has a job globally. You know, that is a priority of the World Bank. You know, so when we think about public-private partnerships, that's another way to think about, you know, how the media is changing.
Absolutely. I'm going to go a bit off script here, Fanny, okay?
Go ahead.
You know, about the topic critical thinking. It sounds to me that everyone's complaining that we're getting fed wrong information, as if the information that's coming our way, it's responsibility to make up our mind whether it's true or not. We should be making up our mind. And I think the good thing that's coming out of fast media, if you really look at it, is that we're going to start to learn to think, and, you know, to stop and think what might or what might not be true, or take a moment before we have an opinion. Yeah. What do you think about that? I mean, are we going to find that at the end of the day we're going to have the benefit of having, you know, this self-respect for deciding and researching before we have opinions and go out there and causing trouble?
Yeah, well, I think from my research perspective, what is always important when I look at data, when I look at material, when I talk to people, or when I look at social media and read news, is to have that sort of, it's an academic answer, I will give you now, I'm sorry for that, but that triangulation, can this really be true? Who does it come from? Absolutely. What are the main interests of communicating this? What is what we call intersectionality? What is the historical, social, economic, political background for this story? And that's what I have in my head every time I look at a social media story. And I think even though I'm doing it very rigorously and methodologically, I have to write whole chapters about how I apply this. I think those skills in a very sort of comprised version will get skills that people, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the younger generation will learn and sort of put as a pair of glasses with every kind of information they get coming from social media or different other platforms. That's at least what I expect will be at the curriculum in all schools globally.
Yes. Well, you know, all that's good about social media is fast, isn't it? But that's also bad.
Yeah.
Yeah? It's really the good and the bad. And I'm going to come to you, Torsten. Don't worry. So the speed of, you know, publication versus professional integrity.
Yeah.
How can we manage that better? Because we all know what the problems are. How can we manage it?
Yeah,
that we're all on the same page.
This is critical because I think this is an ongoing negotiation in every newsroom, in every big news organization. How do we, you know, balance this? But I think we also have to go away from the idea that, for instance, AI is revolutionizing everything. You know, we've always been having these discussions, you know,
Absolutely.
ever since, you know, newspapers arrived, you know.
Or radio.
Yeah, centuries ago.
Attacked.
Yeah, you always want to talk about radio. I'm talking about newspapers here, you know. Okay, so there was a reason it was called yesterday's news, you know, because formerly, yeah, they were just reporting on what was happening. Now people are expecting live events to be covered by media, and media can't really do that because they are not on the streets in Minneapolis with a mobile phone, for instance. So media has to function as the filter between what's happening and the public in some way, and that is really, really crucial. But media lost the battle of speed to social media 10, 15 years ago. If you want to see what's going on, of course, you just go to X or whatever social media platform there is. You don't go to the BBC or my old employer, the Danish radio. You want to see what's actually going on. But media should hesitate once in a while, you know, and just step back and say, okay, we can't validate, we can't verify these pictures, we can't really validate what's going on, and thereby declare that something is going on, but we will provide you with insight and perspective in a few hours, you know, not while it's while it's going on. And I think that's very, very important.
Yeah. Maybe all news should have when it was published, when it was actually decided to publish it, so you can see where it actually lies within the time frame of what's happening. What do you think about that, Fanny?
Yeah.
I thought, Fanny? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think time becomes less important in a way. We talk about speed of publication, but I think it's my hope is that it will more and more depend on the quality and the analysis. I know that within journalism, you talk about who were first with this news, the breaking news, who were the ones that broke the news, sort of. But from my perspective, when I'm looking at the news, I'm never really looking at who is the ones that are breaking this news. I'm looking at who is the most valuable analysis, who brings in the most sources. I mean, and I really hope that this will be the sort of the currency of the future in the media system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a question I wanted to ask you, Angela, in regards to how this speed-driven media affects policy making and institutional decision making.
So, thank you for the question. We will have a conversation after the panel because I want to learn more about your research. Globalization, makes me think about globalization, Y2K. It was the internet, Y2K, globalization, integration of the workforce. People were left behind because there were gaps in skill sets. People felt disenfranchised. And today we're at this inflection point, termed the fourth industrial revolution, AI. And it's important that we have these that we address these gaps in skill sets. Throughout those years, there was an opportunity where there was no there were no guardrails, and so whether it was with the internet, whether it was even with social media, society just allowed, and the technology. Hello? Oh, sorry. The technology companies allowed. Were not really policing. That's what I'm getting at. They weren't really policing. But there is a responsibility for these technology companies and these social media platforms to have. And so what's happened is now, if you look at Australia, it's Australia, right, that has the social media ban.
Yeah.
Right?
On the 16-year-olds.
Right.
Denmark too, in a second.
Yeah. Years later. But the damage has been done. Why haven't they actually been thinking about this early on? It's affected an entire generation of children who are now going to grow up, and are they going to be prepared? They're going to be, able to handle technology and be nimble, but it worries me about their mental health, right? At such a young age to have exposure to social media.
Yes.
But anyway, so in terms of policy, to answer your question, I think it's important that the media plays a role. There's socializing that happens, socializing of ideas. There's trust that's established through influencers who shape, inform policy, just like what happened in Australia and Denmark.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think it's interesting. We talk about speed of publication, right? And speed of social media, AI, and so on. But one thing that's not following is speed of research. So, so I think that's actually one of the challenges that we have now is that research, the infrastructure in the research is so slow. For me, when I'm publishing an article, it's been years underway, and my topics are not that like acute as researchers looking into social media side effects for young people, for example.
Yes.
So the ones that are actually researching the side effects of these developments, they come with research years behind.
Yes.
And
it's always been like that in media.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come back to Torsten now. It's just been given the sign that we're running out of time.
Okay.
How time flies when we're having fun. I am going to come back to radio.
Yeah.
Just as an example, you know, when radio came, the newspapers attacked radio because obviously radio took a lot of readership away. Why did they attack them? How did they attack them, rather? They attacked them by saying, don't believe radio, it's too fast. Read the newspaper because we've had time to research and to think about it and give you the proper news. So we've been through these stages. It's either copy-paste, copy-paste. And one needs to go through the process of watching and seeing that we need to have a limit in TV when until 9 o'clock we cannot have anything too adult, and after 9 o'clock. But it took a long time to get there.
Right.
You know, when radio came, it said it would ruin the youth. It was all about programming, you know. In what running order are you releasing and publishing the content? So what would you say to that, and how can we accelerate, I would ask you, how can we accelerate that learning process we have had without becoming a censored, in case of being a censored, and I'm asking this really particularly, is because looking 5 years ahead, what does media need to do in order to remain credible?
If you are a mature media institution, you really have to rely on credibility and trust, because that is actually your product. As I told you before, my former employer, Danish radio, if they lost trust, if they lost credibility, people would stop, you know, watching them, listening to them, and they would become irrelevant. And no organization wants to be irrelevant at any point, you know. So I think we have to acknowledge that this process is going on. It's accelerating, but I think we need to pull the brakes at some point. And I think that media is right to just actually step back and do the responsible thing, which is not to publish at some times, you know, because being first is not as good as being, you know, right.
Yes, exactly. Do you want to just give a last sentence on that, Fanny?
Yeah, well, what I have, what I would contribute to that is, what's interesting is in these processes where transformation, social development is happening, especially at a pace as we see in Saudi Arabia, there is also this political urge to document that transformation, and that documentation also is at a very, very high pace, where I perhaps would fear that there isn't, that people are getting overwhelmed by the pace of documentation of social developments, rather than perhaps a bigger space for reflecting and evaluating.
Okay. And Angela, do you want to have the final word on that? What are we going to be doing in 5 years?
Oh my goodness. I hope media I hope we develop a generation of journalists who are able to continue doing sound reporting objectively, truthfully, and with accountability.
And properly paid.
And properly paid.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you feel you wish to carry on the conversation,
okay,
on a bilateral basis, I'm sure panelists will be happy to speak with you. But thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the Saudi Media Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.